So what is up, guys? Nick here, helping you to master your technology. Should you buy iPhone XR 2 years later? In this episode, we're going to cover that. Now, this phone does come in at a price of $499. You can also get the 128 gigs for $549, and you can get the multiple colors still here of this phone. There is some competition now. You can get a Google Pixel 4a 5G for $500 as well. That comes with 128 gigs, so more storage there. You can also get something like a OnePlus Nord if you want an Android device. If you want an Apple device, you can get something like an older iPhone XS Max, probably used for around a similar price point. In addition, you can also get the iPhone SE 2020 for cheaper than this. So there is other options in this range, but if you're checking out this video, you're likely interested here in the XR, and some of the key specs include a 6.1-inch liquid retina display, but this one never got to the 1080p resolution, so it's definitely noticeable. It's not OLED, but it still gets plenty bright for an iPhone 625 nits. It still has a lot of the same great features like True Tone, dark mode, and things of that sort. So the XR still has what you would want in an iPhone display. In addition to that, this phone does rock a single 12 megapixel camera, very simple to use. We don't have wide angles, not a lot to learn. It's just a very simple, easy to use everyday iPhone camera, and it does do 4K 60. This one also does feature 3 gigs of RAM and an Apple A12 Bionic chipset, and that's really what its strong suit, I think, is that A12 Bionic. That thing is a beast of a chip even now in 2020. All right, guys, so let's talk about where the iPhone XR stands in the body department. Now, this phone does weigh 194 grams, so this phone is not super light compared to the similar phone of 2020, which is the iPhone 12. So this phone definitely has quite a bit of chunkiness compared to that newer iPhone 12, but the XR overall build with the aluminum edges is still rock solid. It's very sturdy, but the back is glass, so I would keep it in a case for protection. And then the front display here definitely can scratch up if you don't put a screen protector, so it's not bulletproof against scratches and stuff like that, so do keep that in mind. But I gotta state that the body department, it's still a pretty nice looking phone. I wouldn't call it sleek because it's a little bit big and wide, but I would say it's definitely a good looking phone, very simplistic, very minimalistic, and I don't think there's a huge issue with its overall look right now. Of course, at $500, you probably could get something without a notch, but at the same time, it's not that bad. Really, it isn't. The XR still looks pretty clean, pretty minimal in 2020. Okay, guys, and touching a little bit more on the display. So the display gets around 625 nits of brightness, and 2 years later, I'm not really disappointed with the display. It's very similar to the iPhone 11's display. Kind of reminds me of the calibration and color of what you'll find on the iPad Pro 11, actually. And you could definitely watch video very easily here. You will sometimes get the notch cutting in the way, depending on the content, depending on what you're reading and stuff like that, but you'll quickly forget about this because this is not a really small display at 6.1 inches. I don't think it was too bothersome. The bezels are a bit bigger than some other iPhones. You might notice this if you're a bezel maniac. You want to make sure you have no bezels on there is what I mean by that. So like, some Samsung phones go all the way to the edges and give you a little bit less bezels, so you'll definitely might notice that if you craze about those little details like that. But other than that, I would say that the iPhone XR it's pretty good still, even in 2020. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it has those display modes you like. You're not going to find many displays brighter than this at this price point, but you will find displays that have a higher resolution, and you will find displays with much better contrast. So definitely at this price point, nowhere near the best. But if you're in the market for an iPhone at $500 brand new, you're not going to be overly disappointed, as if you're in the market for this iPhone, you're probably not going to be too picky about having OLED display. So 2 years later, when it comes to the iPhone XR software, well, the software on this phone is just like the one you'll find on the iPhone 12. I mean, down to everything. It's identical. So if we go over here, you'll see we do have our app library, of course, right there. Pages are the same, icons are the same. There's no difference in the usability of a XR and an iPhone 12. I will state that the camera does have wide angles, so that's about it. But even the XR, if we go in the camera department now in 2020, I like this. It has the same feature set. If you swipe up, you can do 16:9. You can change things out the same way you can do on the newer iPhone. And if we go over here to video, you can also change those video settings as well. So There's not a big deal of difference at all between these. So 10R, still very up to date, still very worth it if you're in the market for an iOS device or an iPhone device. You'll be very happy with what the 10R has on offer. It's up to date just like any of the current new iPhones you could buy. And performance of the 10R. Well, we've done a lot of speed tests on this phone already, but the 10R is still very smooth. It's very capable in 2020. So what do I mean by this? Well, what I mean is that the differences between this and an iPhone 12 may be felt if you have a keen eye, but most users would never see this. They'll see the other upgrades like these squared edges and things like that, because I was never asking really for a lot more performance over the iPhone 10R. It was a very good performer. I will state that one thing I didn't like is that with 3 gigs of RAM, you could potentially get a reload just because the nature of 3 gigs of RAM is just not enough to hold everything in the background. But iOS still does try its hardest to do the best it can at keeping things at least looking like they're open. But I will state that this phone feels every bit as smooth as an iPhone 12. And I do think that if you buy this phone right now, you're going to be very pleased with how it performs. And even if you do video editing on this phone, it still has the capabilities to edit without any slowdown, any real lag. Again, these are ARM CPUs. So definitely major thumbs up here in performance. No real issues with the 10R. You could see why Apple might have decided to keep this one in the lineup for a little longer. In addition, Face ID for the 10R. That was one of the reasons why you might have picked up a 10R. If you take a look at the SE from 2020, that phone does not have Face ID. And now I want to talk a little bit about the main camera system with the iPhone 10R, because it is really something of a great camera. Now I'm going to go ahead and put the iPhone 12 here for demonstration purposes. What I've always liked about the 10R's camera is it's no fuss. It's just a very simple single lens camera. So you take your photo, intuitively you would just zoom in like that, and you can zoom in. You don't get that optical zoom, but really, how far are you zooming right now during our current times? You could see right here, if we go to 4K, you could go to 4K 60. The video is still fantastic on this phone. Again, it doesn't go wide, so it's not as fun to use as the wide angle cameras, but still, I mean, for what you're getting, I still think you can achieve some professional results if you set up the lighting correctly. If you set the exposure correctly, you can still get some professional results out of something like a 10R. So definitely really like what this phone has to offer. It has slow-mo up to 240 FPS. And if we go over here to photos from the front, it also has a pretty darn good front-facing camera as well. Front-facing camera, while it can't do 4K, unfortunately, it can go up to HD at 60. So you can still get some pretty acceptable results from the front, but don't expect the best on the front there. It's mostly that rear camera that's pretty rock solid for the 10R. I would say in terms of the camera, just pick this up if you're just expecting some pretty good, solid iPhone results, but you're not expecting professional grade camera features and stuff like that. You'll still be fine with the 10R. Now, I want to talk about the storage overall. I mean, it's fast storage. You know, it depends on how much you use the phone, but I think you'll be fine with 128 gigs. Next up is the audio with this phone.
Nick here, helping you to master your technology. Why I'm switching to iPhone 12 mini.
Now, up here, you can get some audio. You can get some audio down from the bottom. There's a lightning port right there. You can definitely get some good sound.
Now, just before we get going, I want to showcase to you that we are recording this episode on the iPhone 12
out of the 10R, but I found that this phone, one time I actually got water in the speaker because it's IP67. It's not as well sealed as the newer IP68 iPhone, so be careful with water with the 10R. It's not the best there. Still some light stuff, maybe not hurt it, like if you get a little bit of rain on it, but I wouldn't get this one near a lot of water. Like, don't take this thing anywhere that's gonna probably fall in a pool or maybe drop it in the toilet. Be careful with this one because the speakers, they become very muffled. It took me a while to get the audio to sound normal again, but definitely pretty decent there. And then phone call quality on this phone, not the best. I've had a couple drop calls and I've had not the best reception, but for the most part, if you're in a good reception area, it'll be fine. The phone does 4G LTE, so do keep in mind, if you're going to keep this thing 3 to 4 years, you're probably going to be far behind the times in terms of the mobile performance when that time comes. So that can make this a tricky recommendation right now, depending on where you're at and how much you care about the future of 5G. So I'm going to wrap this video up with the battery life and then the conclusion. So the battery life on the 10R is still pretty darn impressive for the size of the battery. We only have a 2942 around there, the milliamp hour battery, It's not super large, and my battery health is only at 96%, but I can still easily get through a full day on the 10R. The screen is not OLED, it's not super high res, so it doesn't suck that much battery life on this panel. In addition, a very efficient iOS, a very efficient processor for this phone, gives you pretty darn good battery life, even better than something like a 12 mini that just came out. And I actually would argue it might be even a little bit better than the 12 day to day. So the 10R is still exceptional in this department for battery life. So I can get like 7-8 hours of screen time with this device. Really do like the day-to-day battery performance with this. It can also fast charge up to 15 watts if you do have a compatible brick, and it does have wireless charging that was introduced back on the iPhone 8. So in conclusion, who is this for? I mean, 2 years later, the recommendation has changed a lot. I mean, I don't think everybody this phone is for, but if you want a newer, more modern feeling iPhone, it's not the most modern, but still quite modern, and you just don't want to pay $800, $700, $699 for stuff like an 11 or a 12, $599 for an 11. Some people are just going to say, skip this one, guys, go straight to the 11. But for some people, that extra 100, that extra $200 difference makes a big deal. If you want something pretty modern, but you don't care about 5G, this is going to be a great option. But keep in mind, there are other options out there in this price range that will give you 5G. They're not necessarily going to be iPhones, but they will definitely give you something a little bit more up to date. And this phone should have around 2 to 3 years of software updates remaining. So pretty happy with the 10R. I don't think it's going to age as well as something like the iPhone 12 just because it had 4G LTE. But let me know your thoughts on the 10R. Do you still have one? Do you plan on picking one up? Did you trade it a long time ago? Let us know. I wanted to revisit this one since it's been a little bit over 2 years, and let us know down below. Thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Nick here, helping you to master your technology. Be sure to be well, and peace.